Before I start, there are spoilers for the entirety of Onward, How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Lion King, and a little bit of Moana and BoJack Horseman. If you don't want to have any of them spoil, here's your warning. So, I finally got around to watching Pixar's newest film, Onward. I was quite looking forward to watching it because it sounded like the sort of film that would be right down my alley, even with all the backlash it's gotten. I mean, how could I not love a film about siblings working together to battle through a dangerous world to get their dad back from the dead? I love films about siblings and family, and tend to enjoy adventure in films too, so it should have worked for me, but as you probably guessed, that wasn't the case. I mean, I didn't hate it, but I just came away feeling kind of underwhelmed. I felt like the ending was fulfilling and the climax was great, but when I thought back to the middle section, I just kind of felt like I was looking back into an empty void. I mean, I can remember some parts of it if I think for long enough, but for the most part, the middle and the beginning of the film were just very dull. But the weird thing is, for some reason, the endings of this film, as well as other films such as How to Train Your Dragon 3, which is in the same boat, despite the small character issues which I won't get into in this video, both grabbed me at pretty much the same part. I was hooked from the climax, or basically the third act onward. I'm not sorry. The endings of these sorts of films had me tearing up both times and were very emotionally satisfying. At this point, you might be thinking that I'm just going to say that there weren't enough emotional scenes during the film. And, well, the answer is yes and no. As with most things, the answer isn't binary. There's more to it than just emotion, but emotion definitely is a part of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At this stage though, I thought that there must be a reason behind the boring middle and exciting end trend, and then it came to me that it's probably something to do with story and plot. Not that I knew the difference of anything, it just sounded right. But as you probably shouldn't just run with things because they sound right though, I decided to investigate more because the thing is, I did like aspects of the entire film. I like the kind of hybrid magic normal world of, did the Onward town even have a name? I could also empathize with the Onward characters who I was seeing for the first time. And I did like the concept of magic that they had in the film. There were a lot of things that the film did do right. Anyway though, enough rambling, story versus plot, what is the difference? I wish I could tell you for sure. I honestly still can't believe this, but people cannot make up their mind. And even worse, when they give their definitions, they talk as if their definition is the absolute definition and no others exist. So I was there thinking that I was crazy until D4 Darius came and said that this was a debate that is an actual thing, and people literally cannot come to an agreement on this. So there actually isn't a definition that everyone agrees upon for the two fundamental aspects of film. And now, thanks to this nerdy little definition war that they've got going on online, my notes were an absolute mess. So thanks for not even being able to agree on the basics. So anyway, what I'm going to do when my notes are no longer a mess, they are still a mess while I'm typing this by the way, is that I'm going to try and separate what the majority of people say into two sides. Then I'm going to just run with one and say how that relates to Onward. Deal? Deal. On side one, story is kind of like the finished product for everything, including the music, characters, voice acting, plot, an outline for the story, and everything else that's in a story. The specifics for what are happening in the film are under the plot, whereas the outline is a chronological ordering of events, and is very vague. So vague in fact that it can be used for multiple different stories. For example, the story outline I'd imagine that they had for Onward would be that the two brothers play together as kids, basically all of the flashback stuff. Two siblings lose their parent, they find a way to partially get the parent back for a day, but the parent can't communicate with them. They find out how to get the rest of the parent back. They then go to get the rest of the parent back. They get the parent back in full form for a bit. And finally, the parent disappears. The outline could also contain parts that are cut from the story or weren't planned to be put in the story in the first place, but were just thought about. So this might not even be all of the outline, it's just what I know of the story. Alongside this outline, the characters and themes will likely have been decided upon, but there's a whole lot of questions on the table. For example, why was only part of the parent brought back? Why did the characters care to go on the journey that they went on? Why does the parent have to leave at the end of the day? And I could just keep going. Don't be deceived though, having a lot of questions is actually a good thing because having a story that leads to a lot of questions gives a lot of room for building a solid, unique plot or multiple plots, which is how sitcoms, crime dramas, and many other shows work. For example, in BoJack Horseman, which I've recently been making my way through, the story outline would be this. An event happens that causes an issue that usually leads to another issue. Then the first issue is resolved while the second is usually getting worse in the background. Then the second issue gets resolved. Then there's a new normal where the ramifications of the issues from that episode then affect future episodes. And pretty much every episode having that format is not bad. Again, it's very much the norm for these shows to have repeating outlines. In fact, BoJack Horseman is an absolutely great show. Don't let the bad first episode put you off, by the way. The first episode is pretty bad. And this general outline is also the case for films too. For example, while it wasn't Moana's main story outline, if you were to outline the story of Moana's grandma, it could be plotted out in a very similar way to what happened with the brother's father in Onward. I'm not going to go through it, but feel free to kind of try and link the two together. They are actually pretty similar. The plot then is where the story outline is taken and is put to a structure that often takes the outline out of its chronological ordering and structures it in a way that the crew think will tell the most appealing story. By the way, if you want to learn more about a story structure that is extremely common and is basically in every film, called Hero's Journey, I actually did a video about it. Video link is up there. Anyway, in plot, we know exactly what's going to happen for that story. All the why questions are answered, and everything in the outline is linked together. So for example, the question of why was only a part of the parent brought back in Onward would be that Ian wasn't strong enough to complete the magical spell, so ended up losing control halfway through the spell and broke the gem that allowed for the spell to happen. And since it was just the dad's legs that were retrieved, he couldn't speak because he didn't have a mouth. On side 2, story contains the thoughts and themes, but plot contains the actions. Or, to oversimplify it, story is to do with the internal, and plot is to do with the external. Both are fully fleshed out and are in the film side by side, rather than plot being an element within story, as side 1 thinks of it. On side 2, the world, characters, and outline are built separately and are all within the package. And making a good overall product are usually a matter of balancing story and plot. So when somebody complains about there being no plot, they basically mean that no action has happened. Whereas when they say that there was no story, they mean that things did happen, but they have no reason to care about any of the things that are happening. Also, when thinking about plot versus story on this side, the plot isn't what the character necessarily wants to do, but is what they must do to get their desired state of mind. For example, in How to Train Your Dragon 3, Hiccup wanting to look after Berk's residents, be a good leader, and show the world that dragons are friendly pets is story, whereas looking for the hidden world, fighting back against Grimmel, and raiding the ship right at the beginning are all plot. I Want songs are also a great example of story. These are songs that are devoted to telling the audience exactly what the character wants to achieve in the film. Mulan doesn't sing about how she wants to cut her hair, and Ariel doesn't say that she wants to become a human. Instead, Mulan is singing about how she just wants to be herself and how she doesn't fit in with patriarchy and societal traditions. And Ariel is singing about how she wants to explore the human world and be a part of it. What they sing about is the story, but if they did sing about the things I mentioned earlier and somehow it didn't sound terrible, that would have been plot. Neither of these sides is necessarily worse than the others, and there may be variations here and there, but these two ways, in my interpretation, are how most people think of story versus plot. I'm going to be going with side 1, although if you want to see the second side talked about more in depth, there's a video by Frustrated Jacob, fun name there by the way, who goes in depth with that argument. So how does all of this relate to Onward? Well, as my initial hunches predicted, the reason why I didn't like this film actually does relate to plot versus story. When I thought back to the story of Onward, the themes of not following the crowd and valuing the family you already have, as well as the world itself and even the characters, not them though, everything was well made. Even the outline sounded great. It was the plot that just missed the mark for me on this film and other films, such as How to Train Your Dragon 3. The issue for me is that these films just don't pull enough from the overall story that they created to make for the rich plot that was needed. The story was there, but the plot just didn't live up to its potential, leaving the plot feeling very generic and basic in my eyes. During the film, I was seeing stuff happening. I mean, Bali did turn small for some reason, and there were fairies chasing after them at another point. It's not that these things didn't make sense in the world, but it is that they are not really things that help with the story's themes or help to bring the characters together. They just happen without much thought for why they should be happening. That's not to say that there weren't some good scenes here and there. I love the scene of Ian having to trust Barley while he was walking between the two cliffs to bring down the bridge. That scene was a real transformation point for Ian and was great to see. But these scenes were very far and few between, and that precisely was the issue. The elements that could have made this a great film were all there in the story, but the plot didn't do a good enough job of bringing those elements to life. Maybe instead of having a mediocre car chase by some random fairies that randomly show up and contribute precisely nothing to the story, this story should have been focused more on the final journey after finding the clue, where they could have come across more obstacles like the invisible floor beforehand that could only be overcome by magic. Or if you really wanted a car chase, why not have a car chase take place between them and the cops rather than the brothers and the random fairies? That way you could have incorporated the brothers and father into the scene and we could have learned more about their relationship through this interaction. And yes, I know that they technically had a car chase, but it was literally just around the corner, so it doesn't really count. All of that is great and all, but it doesn't answer the full question. Why did I find the end to be so satisfying if I wasn't really being grabbed by the middle bit? Well, I think that's mainly down to what tends to happen towards the end of films in Act 3. If you think about the end of films in general after their climax, the end part is the part where the characters, themes, and other non-plot story elements really come to the forefront. It's also the part where Pixar tries their absolute best to get us all to cry. And they sure succeed. That scene in Coco gets me every single time. I'm not going to show footage, but you know exactly what scene I'm talking about. And that's totally the case with Onwards too, with its really exciting climax. And more specifically with Onward, we feel the satisfaction because the film showed us little hints of Ian's development here and there throughout the film. It's providing enough to make you know that the development is happening in the background. And I mean, the plot wasn't lying, it was in the story whether we saw it or not. In my eyes though, the plot didn't show enough of that side of the story. It was the exact same issue with the relationship between the brothers too. Ian and Barley were together for a lot of the film, but when I think back to the time that they actually spent to slow down and talk and generally develop their relationship, I don't think there was enough, especially since it kept moving over to the mother and the dragon character, who I thought were very forgettable. All that this did was took attention away from the main characters, who we are supposed to care about the most. And before you say something along the lines of, it's a kids film, it doesn't matter, just because you think of it as a kids film doesn't mean filmmakers have free license to pump out any rubbish they want. I'm sorry, but a bad plot is a bad plot whether it's made for a toddler, a middle-aged person, or an old-age pensioner. Also, a good plot doesn't always mean a complex plot. Take The Lion King for example, a story that I feel has a plot that interweaves really well with all of the other elements of the story, and is overall very strong and memorable. In The Lion King, the main theme of the story, although there are more themes, is that we build upon the people, or in The Lion King, the animals, that came before us, and that they will always live inside us. This and other themes are shown throughout the story, not as something that the plot heads back to every now and again, but something that is woven tightly into it and is essential for it to work. For starters, this theme is basically the idea behind the circle of life. It's the idea that the animals and plants that lived in the past and died were needed to keep the species going, whether they were there to be food that was eaten responsibly, be support, be past rulers, or be parents, or a combination of the above. The direct comparison of this to the elephant graveyard only helps to enhance the theme because that's a world where the circle of life isn't a thing and is a place where the characters have no regard for maintaining any sort of balance or for contributing in any way to what would make the world better for future generations. As the story goes along, we also get the talk between Simba and Mufasa, where the theme is talked about directly, and then later, after Mufasa's death that scarred so many of us, that message is constantly there within the film. In the second act, we see the internal battle that Simba goes through where he feels let down by his father and feels that he's not being supported by those people that are up there in the sky as he thinks of them. But still, somewhere in the back of his mind, he still believes that they are up there looking down at him from the stars. Rafiki then comes and literally knocks him back into gear and helps him to believe in his past relatives being there to keep pushing him forward. This is what Rafiki means when he says that Mufasa is still alive and is living in Simba. He is basically talking about his father's lessons and general wisdom being inside of Simba. This then gives him the courage to go back and be the support that his pride needs. That's an example of a great story. It's one where every character matters, every location matters, and themes are woven into the plot to make something great. For example, in terms of location, Timon and Pumbaa's oasis was intentionally designed that way because it was supposed to be a sort of paradise where Simba could go and forget about his past. Every location had a reason to be like it was. I wouldn't say that Onward did a terrible job of this. The world it's built still had the potential to be very interesting, and bar the fairies, I didn't have an issue with any of the characters. I didn't think they were bad, but they just didn't get the same treatment that was given to films such as The Lion King. And what really makes this such a shame too is that there was so much potential there, which the third act and the opening really highlighted to me. The scenes at those parts of the films were great. All that it would have taken is for some of the story that made those scenes great to be brought to the earlier scenes, and we would have had a film that was so much better. If you like this video, please consider checking out my Patreon page that I've just launched. I really want to continue making videos that dive into topics related to animation, and any support that I get on there will really help to allow me to spend that time to keep making these sorts of videos. Of course though, without your support on here, I wouldn't even be considering opening up a Patreon. So if you've reached this far, thank you so much for watching this video. Stay safe everyone, have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.